They called her the most dangerous woman ever to wear a crown, a queen whose kisses could kill, a ruler who didn't just execute her enemies. She poisoned her lovers, one by one, until the throne itself was drowning in blood. This is no fairy tale. This is the true story of Queen Anula of Sri Lanka, the ancient world's most lethal femme fatale. A queen who ruled not with armies, but with cups of wine laced with death. Before we begin, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to Historian Bunker. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another dark, hidden story like this. The city of Anuradhapura shimmered under the tropical sun, its palaces glinting like gold in a sea of green. It was here, in the heart of Sri Lanka's ancient kingdom, that a young woman named Anula entered history and rewrote it in blood. Anula was not born to rule. She was born to seduce, to manipulate, to survive in a world where women were ornaments, unless they learned to be weapons. And Anula, more than anyone, knew the deadliest weapon in the kingdom was a smiling face. Her husband, King Koranaga, believed he had found the perfect queen, graceful, loyal, and soft-spoken. But behind the gentle eyes was a mind sharper than any blade. Anula was already planning her rise to power and his fall. The palace was a world of whispers. Every hallway carried secrets. Every servant had a story to tell, and Anula listened to them all. She learned who hated the king, who envied him, and who could be bought. Her first taste of power came in the form of a gold goblet. It was said the king had taken ill after a feast, a sudden fever, a burning in his gut. By morning, he was dead. The court mourned, and Anula smiled. She became queen regent for her young son, but she had no intention of stepping aside when he came of age. The throne was hers now, and she intended to keep it, no matter how many bodies she had to step over. When a visiting general caught her eye, the palace held its breath. Within weeks, he was more than a guest. He was her lover. Within months, he was her new king. And within a year, he was dead. The pattern began. Anula would marry, rule alongside her husband, and then he would mysteriously die. Always after a shared meal. Always after she had poured the wine herself. Whispers turned to rumors, and rumors to fear. But no one dared accuse her, because those who spoke against Queen Anula never woke up the next day. The kingdom began to realize something terrifying. This was no grieving widow. This was a predator, and the palace was her hunting ground. One by one, noblemen began to disappear from public life, their names whispered in the marketplace. Did you hear? The queen's husband is dead again. Who will she marry next? Who will survive her bed? Anula's seductions were strategic. Each man she chose had political value. A general with an army, a noble with wealth, a foreign prince with connections. And each time, once she had taken what she wanted, she disposed of him. Her poison of choice was a closely guarded secret. Some said it was made from the sap of the deadly oleander. Others whispered of rare snake venoms, imported from distant lands. Whatever it was, it worked quickly, but not without agony. Victims were said to convulse, their skin turning pale, eyes wide with horror. And always, Anula would sit beside them, holding their hand, murmuring sweet reassurances as the life drained from their body. By now, she had killed more kings than most assassins could dream of. The people began to speak of her not as a queen, but as a curse, a black widow whose web stretched across the entire kingdom. But Anula was not done. Her ambition had grown beyond the throne. She wanted to be remembered, feared, worshipped, and for that, she needed more than husbands to kill. The chronicles say she began to take lovers openly, without the pretense of marriage. Musicians, warriors, foreign traders, all were invited into her chambers. Some lasted a night, some lasted a week. None lived to tell their story. The palace gardens became a graveyard of secrets. Servants whispered that beneath the marble fountains lay the bones of men who had once shared the queen's bed. And still, she smiled in public, a vision of royal grace. In the capital, fear turned to fascination. Merchants sold charms said to ward off her gaze. Poets wrote verses about her beauty and her cruelty. Children dared each other to shout her name at the palace gates. But in the shadows, a group of nobles began to whisper of rebellion. They had lost fathers, brothers, sons to her poisons. And they knew, if no one stopped Queen Anula, no man in the kingdom was safe. What they didn't know was that Anula already suspected them. and she had no intention of being anyone's prey. The rebellion began, as all rebellions do, with whispers. Men met in darkened rooms, swearing loyalty to one another and vowing to end her reign. But every whisper in Anuradhapura had a way of finding its way back to the queen. Anula's spies were everywhere. From palace cooks to stable boys, she knew the price of a secret, and she paid it well. One servant's betrayal could buy his freedom, his silence, or his life, depending on her mood. The nobles thought themselves clever. They avoided the palace, spoke in code, and met outside the city walls. But their mistake was simple. They underestimated her patience. Anula didn't strike immediately. She let the conspiracy grow like a vine, wrapping tighter around its own members. The more names she learned, the more satisfying the harvest would be. She began to send invitations. Grand feasts, festivals, and private audiences were announced. Every noble suspected of treason found themselves on the guest list, and every one of them accepted. The first feast was a masterpiece of theater. Golden platters of roasted meat, fragrant bowls of rice, spiced curries that filled the air with temptation. And at the center, goblets of wine, poured by the queen herself. No one refused the drink. To refuse was to insult the crown, and to confirm your guilt. One by one, the nobles raised their cups and drank. It began slowly. A cough here, a bead of sweat there. By the time the first man fell forward into his plate, the rest were already beginning to feel the fire in their veins. Panic erupted. Some fled, only to collapse in the corridors. Others begged for mercy, clutching at her silk robes. She offered none. By morning, the rebellion was over. The city awoke to the smell of funeral pyres. The queen had purged her enemies in a single night, and no one dared to speak against her again. But with her enemies gone, Anula's hunger only grew. She no longer killed for protection. She killed for pleasure. Her next husband was said to be a foreign prince, tall, handsome, and utterly besotted with her. He lasted 3 months. The official cause of death? A sudden illness brought on by the climate. The chronicles are careful not to say how many men she married in total. Some say 5. Others claim more than a dozen. What they agree on is this. Every man who lay beside Queen Anula died. And the people, they began to change. Fear became awe. A strange, dangerous respect. Men feared her, yes, but they also couldn't look away. Foreign travelers wrote of her beauty, her charm, her wit. Merchants compared her to Cleopatra, to Semiramis, to every legendary seductress in history. But none of those women matched her body count. Her palace became a fortress of silk and shadows. No one entered without her permission. No one left without her blessing. And sometimes, neither. Anula began to indulge in public displays of dominance. She would ride through the city in golden chariots, flanked by guards carrying poisoned spears. Citizens bowed deeply, never daring to meet her eyes. But even queens cannot defy fate forever. Somewhere in the kingdom, another plot was taking shape. And this time, the conspirators were willing to do what the last rebellion could not: strike her before she struck them. What they didn't realize was that Queen Anula had already begun preparing for her most ambitious kill yet. Not just a man, not just a noble, a rival queen. By now, Queen Anula was more than a ruler. She was a legend. Parents frightened their children into obedience with her name. Foreign envoys arrived in awe and left in coffins. Her cruelty had acquired a kind of artistry. Killing was no longer simply removing obstacles, it was sending messages. And each death was staged like a public performance. When a rival queen from a neighboring kingdom dared to insult her, Anula sent an invitation of friendship. The two women dined together beneath silk canopies, their laughter drifting into the night. By dawn, the rival was dead. It wasn't just the swiftness of the kill. It was the way Anula claimed the moment, wearing her enemy's jewels at court the very next day, smiling as if nothing had happened. Rumors began to swirl of her private chambers. Some said she kept a collection of goblets, each one used to kill a man, polished and displayed like trophies. Others claimed she whispered to the dead in candlelit rooms, seeking advice from those she had poisoned. Her reign was not without its challenges. Famine struck the land, and unrest began to brew among the common people. But even in hardship, fear kept them loyal, for now. The court, however, was restless. Anula's habit of replacing husbands meant the throne changed hands too often, creating instability. Every new king was a temporary figurehead, a puppet whose strings she cut when it pleased her. Her next choice was particularly shocking: a palace guard, barely more than a soldier. The court was scandalized, but Anula didn't care about scandal. She cared about control. This guard-turned-king was young, strong, and utterly devoted to her. For a brief moment, it seemed he might be the one man to survive her. But devotion is not immunity. When his influence began to grow, when the soldiers whispered his name with respect, Anula decided the experiment was over. One night, after a private feast, he fell ill. By morning, the throne was hers alone again. At this point, the chronicles say, she stopped even pretending to share power. She ruled openly as sole monarch, the first woman to do so in the island's recorded history. And she ruled with an iron hand dipped in venom. Justice was swift and fatal. Petty criminals disappeared. Political opponents met accidents. But with power came paranoia. She doubled her guard, forbade unsummoned visitors, and even had her food tasted, not because she feared her cooks, but because she knew the method all too well. She had ruled for years without challenge. But the more blood she spilled, the more enemies she made. And in the shadows, the seeds of her downfall were beginning to sprout. One man in particular, a prince with a legitimate claim to the throne, began to rally support. He was patient, careful, and unlike the others, he had no intention of stepping into her bed. Anula's greatest weapon had always been her ability to seduce before she struck. But what happens when the prey refuses to play the game? The prince's resistance infuriated her, and in her fury, she made the mistake that would begin her end. She tried to kill him in public. The palace courtyard was heavy with heat the day Queen Anula made her move. The prince had been summoned under the guise of a truce, a chance to discuss the future of the kingdom. Everyone knew it was a trap. The banquet was a smaller affair than her usual feasts. Just the prince, a few nobles, and her most trusted guards. Wine flowed, laughter rose, and the queen's eyes never left her target. At the height of the evening, she offered him a goblet. The prince accepted it, raised it to his lips, and then, to her shock, handed it to the man beside him. The guard drank. Moments later, he collapsed, gasping for breath. The courtyard froze in silence. The trap had been exposed. The prince rose, his voice carrying across the stunned gathering. "Here is your queen," he said, pointing to the dying man. "A ruler who poisons her own people. A black widow who feasts on the blood of kings." The words spread faster than fire in dry grass. By dawn, the city was alive with rage. The merchants who once whispered her name in fear now spatted in anger. The soldiers she relied on began to question their loyalty. Anula, for the first time, miscalculated. Her usual answer, swift assassination, was no longer possible. Killing the prince now would make her guilt undeniable. She retreated to the palace, barricading herself behind walls of stone and ranks of guards. But paranoia is not the same as safety. The prince's supporters swelled in number, and soon, an army stood outside her gates. For days, the city was caught between siege and spectacle. The people gathered in the streets, waiting to see if their queen would fight or flee. Inside, Anula plotted. She considered a desperate escape, dressing as a servant, slipping out through the hidden water tunnels. But pride held her back. She would not crawl away like a thief. If she was to fall, she would fall as a queen. The prince knew she was cornered, but he also knew something else. Killing her in battle would make her a martyr to some. She needed to be destroyed not just physically, but symbolically. And so, he prepared a punishment that would match her crimes. A death as public, as humiliating, and as final as the poison she had poured so many times before. Anula, watching from her balcony, saw the gallows being built in the central square. Not a simple noose, not even a sword. Something far more theatrical. The prince had chosen the stake. She was to be burned alive. The morning of her execution, the city of Anuradhapura awoke before sunrise. From every street and market, people poured toward the central square, drawn by the promise of watching their queen's final hour. The stake loomed high above the crowd, its base piled with dry wood and oil-soaked reeds. It was not just a method of death, it was a message. The prince wanted the fire to be seen from the farthest corners of the kingdom. Anula emerged from the palace surrounded by guards. She wore no rags, no chains, only her finest silks, her hair woven with gold. Even in defeat, she refused to be anything less than a queen. The crowd jeered, some throwing stones and rotten fruit. But she walked with her head high, her eyes sweeping over the sea of faces. If she feared death, she did not show it. At the stake, they bound her hands and feet. The prince stood nearby, watching her with cold detachment. "Do you have any last words?" he asked. Anula's lips curled into the faintest smile. "I regret nothing," she said. The crowd erupted, some in outrage, others in awe at her defiance. The torches were brought forward. Flames licked the wood, crackling and spitting as the smoke rose into the morning air. The heat swelled, and the queen's silks began to smolder. The fire caught quickly, wrapping her in a wall of orange and gold. Some said she screamed, others swore she remained silent until the end. The chronicles disagree, but they agree on this: she did not beg. When the fire finally died, nothing remained but ashes and twisted metal from her jewelry. The prince ordered them scattered beyond the city walls, so no shrine could be built in her memory. Yet memory is not so easily erased. For years, her name was spoken in hushed tones, half curse, half legend. Some saw her as a monster, others as a woman who dared to seize power in a world built for men. In time, her story became a warning of ambition without restraint, of power without mercy. But for those who knew her, it was simpler than that. Queen Anula was not a tragedy. She was a storm, and storms do not fade quietly.